Hey everyone, my name is Haya and I'm the project's coordinator. If this is your first time joining us or you want to know what we're all about, make sure to fill out the Connect card. Our host will post a link in the chat or you can scan this QR code. Just over a month ago, we as a leadership team here at the project looked at the rising numbers of COVID cases and particularly ICU numbers in our city, and we made the decision that even though we were allowed to remain open, the best way to serve our community was to postpone in-person gathering on Sunday nights. Now with numbers stabilizing and the situation looking more manageable than a month ago, we have made the decision to reopen our in-person gatherings starting next Sunday, January 31st. We'll be posting all the details on all our platforms, so stay tuned for that. We are so excited to see all of you again. Another exciting thing happening next week is Connecting Point. This is your best chance to join a community of other young adults. Being part of a small group is one of the best decisions I've ever made because not only did I get to do an activity I enjoy, but I've made real, genuine friendships along the way. Shout out to the climbing crew, you guys are the best! Joining a group on your own can be super intimidating, I get that. So why not invite a friend to join a group with you? It could be one of the best decisions you make for yourself this semester. So, don't spend your winter alone and make sure to join a group next Sunday. Last thing, if you're already watching on Zoom with us, that's awesome. If you're not there, what are you doing? Come hang out with us on Zoom to watch the service together and chat for a couple minutes afterwards. Tonight, we got Tomas continuing our series called How to Not Lose, and we got a new format that I think you will enjoy.
Hey, if you're watching us online, and those of you who are kind of with us, it's so great having you at the project in a bit of a new setting, and we can't wait to be with you again. But for now, this is gonna have to do, but I know that you've been enjoying this series already, and I'm excited for what we have for you this week or tonight. Now, I don't know if you remember, there was this video I saw, I think it was like about a month ago. I don't know if you saw it was like this old guy who ended up there's an alligator that went to go eat his dog, and he jumped into the water and he pulled it out of the jaws of the crocodile, which was like, the guy looks like he would have been eaten by the alligator, but he just ripped the dog out of it. And it reminds me, a few years ago, there was this migrant. His name was Mamadou Gassam, and he was in France, and it was this video of this child who was hanging over the balcony, and this guy ended up climbing 5 stories, saving this boy's life who was gonna fall off. And they actually called him, they dubbed him the Spider-Man of France. And when he was speaking with the president, he said, I crossed the street to save him. He said he didn't even think twice. When I started to climb, it gave me the courage to keep climbing. Where was the dad of this boy? He was actually out playing Pokemon Go. Now, I don't know if anyone still plays that game, but he was out there doing it. And Macron, the president, he said, bravo. He said during a one-on-one meeting that they ended up giving him a medal, and it was of courage and devotion. Imagine though if Mamadou, probably the most unlikely hero, imagine if he wouldn't have stepped up and courageously saved that child. Imagine how different that family's life would be at this point unless he saw something and thought, I gotta do something about it. And I'm gonna climb these 5 stories and I'm gonna save this boy's life. He did the right thing at the right time because he knew it was the right thing to do. And honestly, like that's kind of who I wanna be. I think that's kind of what all of us wanna be, the kind of person who does the right thing when it's the right time, because we just know it's the right thing to do. Because to be honest, I think much of our culture almost feels like that child hanging on the ledge or that dog between the teeth of the alligator. We're neglected by others, by institutions, sometimes fathers and mothers. We're kind of just wandering around, feeling our way, but knowing that something's wrong in our world. And even just our demographic. Now, many of us feel like, I think, that maybe we're the ones that we need rescue. That why save someone else when I feel like sometimes I need rescue? Like just even hear some of these stats. So Indeed.com ranked Canada 17th out of 35 countries in job happiness. So we're not at the top, we're not at the bottom, but we're kind of there in the middle. Research found that almost 10% of people aged 16 to 24 were always or often lonely, the highest proportion of any age group. This is more than 3 times higher than people aged 65 and over. They say that young marrieds actually have the highest rate of divorce. Suicide accounts for 24% of all deaths among 15 to 24-year-olds and 16% among 24 to 44-year-olds. Individuals aged 15 to 24 experience some of the highest rates of STI. And 30% of all photocopier faults worldwide are caused by people sitting on them and photocopying their butts. Now, there is something wrong with our demographic. There's something wrong with our culture and society. And I think we're thinking, who is coming to rescue us, right? Who's going to do something about it? But here's the thing. I think God comes to us and he asks us a very different question. It's not who's coming. He says this, would you be the person? Would I be the person? Whether you're watching or sitting in this room, would you be the person who scales the building, who sees a problem and does the right thing at the right time because they know it's the right thing to do to save culture, to save the people you know, to do something about these stats, to do something about the people who are suffering? God asks us, would you be that person? In 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 12, it's said this way, don't let anyone think less of you because you are young. But hear this, be an example. Did you hear that? Be an example. There's an actionable thing there. It's not wait around for an example. Timothy's saying, no, you be the example. Who cares how young you are? Be the example to all believers in what you say, in the way you live, in your love, your faith, and your purity. Basically, will you be the person that scales the walls to save culture, your people? See, God is looking for people like Mamadou to disregard status, to disregard safety and hardship, who are willing to do the right thing in their lives. Why? Why would we do that? Why is he asking us? Because there are people looking. Are people dangling in their life, hoping that someone would hear their screams, would you save me? That's our purpose. When it comes down to it as Christians, what we're called to do, if you follow Jesus or claim to, it's actually not to live for ourselves, but to live for the sake of others, for the sake of Jesus and the sake of other people. To me, that sounds a lot like Jesus. That means setting an example. That means doing the right thing. That means being the kind of people that in our sexuality, in our living, in the way we hope, in our relationships, in our work with life, with those that we love and those who are hard to love, that we would do the right thing in the right time because we know it's the right thing to do, to be courageous, to set an example. And that's what biblical courage is. Despite what you hear, despite what's said, despite what's believed and trusted, expected in culture, it's to be that person who does what's right, that honors Jesus. Because honoring Jesus is not just because that's right, but because it actually also honors humanity. It scales buildings for the sake of Jesus, and it scales buildings for the sake of the other. So who do you want to be this year? That's a question I got to ask myself. Who do I want to be this year? Do I want to be that person that's stuck, or do I want to be courageous? Do I want to be that person waiting around, or do I want to be the person that hears Jesus' call? Would you be the example? Who do I want to be? Do we want to be stuck, or do we want to be courageous? But do I have the courage to scale the building? I'm one person, and I'm a short one at that. I mean, you can think of all the faults that we may have why we can't be those people. Do you have the courage, though, to be the kind of person who does the right thing at the right time because you know it's right, despite what you hear, see? Because that's what it comes down to. The courage to make the hard decisions, right? To be the kind of person you want to be, to do what's right, even if it costs you security, even if it costs you reputation, even if it costs you a certain level of comfort, to do the right thing. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 15 to 17, it's one of my favorite verses. It says this, so be careful how you live. Don't live like fools, but like those who are wise. Make the most of every opportunity in these evil days. Don't act thoughtlessly, but understand what the Lord wants you to do. Again, all actionable items. They're all movements to have the courage to do the right thing, to end up in the right place, doing the right thing at the right time. Listen, it rarely happens in a fleeting moment. Like, really, how many times are you in a place where you've got to rescue a damsel in distress or a man with a man cold, right? It doesn't happen very often. You're not lifting cars off of children. You're not doing those things. It's not like there's a lot of kids hanging off balconies. Those are momentary times of courage. But to be a courageous person, to develop that as a character, it's a reality that is actually developed inside of you. But listen to this. It's developed inside of you when no one is looking. It's when no one is asking you to save them. Because here's the thing, who you are when no one is looking is actually who you're becoming. I mean, it's so easy to put towards a persona, a personality, a character trait, whether it's through social media or just to our friends. But really, it's who we are in the dark that's telling us who we're becoming as people. Who is that? Who are you becoming? Now, let's be honest, including myself, most of us. We want the courage without the heart to do the right, hard, silent things. It'd be easy if it's just like, just download Matrix-style courageous heart into myself. That doesn't work that way. It's developed when no one is looking. Example of this is actually our story. It starts tonight in this book called 1 Samuel, chapter 16. It has to do with this transition of power from a powerful king to an unknown shepherd boy. And we have this king named Saul, who honestly, he had the power and the resources to be momentarily courageous. Now, he messed it up, but that's the difference. So Saul had this, he had the power, he had the resources, he was king. He was someone who was chosen because of his stature and because he looked powerful. And he was chosen to be this person to lead the nation Israel courageously. He had everything he needed, but he dropped the ball. The reality is that he neglected his responsibilities to care for the people of God. In chapter 15, you'll see that. He had folded under pressure of what others wanted him to do. He folded into his own impatience, his own importance, and neglected to do what was right. And he actually put the entire nation in a leaderless panic that could have and was bringing them to their entire destruction. So you have this guy who seemed like he would have been the person who would have been courageous. He had everything he needed, but he dropped the ball. And so there's this transition. So God sends this guy named Samuel, who was a prophet this time. And a prophet is basically the mouthpiece of God. He hears what God is saying and he declares it to the people. And his job at this point was to help find a new king because Saul was derelict in his duties. And in chapter 16, verse 1, you read this. So 1 Samuel, not Famuel, 1 Samuel, chapter 16, verse 1. Famuel is a book I'm writing. But now the Lord said to Samuel, "You have mourned long enough for Saul. I've rejected him as king of Israel. So fill your flask with olive oil and go to Bethlehem. Find a man named Jesse who lives there, for I've selected one of his sons to be my king." So Samuel actually gets there. Here's how the story goes. And for just the sake of time, he gets there. And I'll basically summarize what happens. He assumes that this new king would kind of be like Saul. That the one who would courageously lead the nation of Israel, this guy would be tall, dark, and handsome. You know, this guy would look like a fighter. We know this because in chapter 16, verse 6, it says that Samuel found this one son, and his name is Eliab, and he looked like a fighter, a warrior. But I love what God said to him immediately after this. He says, "But the Lord said to Samuel, listen, don't judge by his appearance or height." Like, did you just see what Saul did? "For I've rejected him." The Lord doesn't see things the way you see them. See, people judge by outward appearance, but the Lord, well, I look at the heart. This guy named David, this young boy, this young shepherd, was the last of his sons. In fact, Jesse even forgot about David. Samuel's like, "Well, these are all your sons." And God says, "No, do you have another one?" And Saul's like, "No." The father's like, Jesse's like, "No." "Oh, yeah, actually, I do have another son." That's when you know you got too many kids, right? You have way too much fun in the sack and not enough responsibility. And so he's got this other son, right? He's out in the field, totally forgot about him, right? He was totally looked over. Why? Because he just tended sheep. He wasn't a warrior. He was out in the fields, hanging out with sheep. But God's like, "That's the one I'm looking for. Don't look at outward appearances. I'm looking at the heart. And here you have this forgotten shepherd boy named David, and he ended up being the greatest king Israel ever had. See, Saul had the resources and the power to be momentarily courageous, but here's the difference. David had the heart that was courageous. It was developed inside of him. He didn't have the resources, but he had the heart. And in the next scene, in chapter 17, you see it come full out. This non-warrior, he ends up saving Israel. When confronted with this stronger army, when their king actually lacked the courage to step up, David stepped up. Even Jesus himself has described it in the context of coming from the line of David and even being known as the great shepherd like David. He continuously led Israel into its most prosperous, most blessed years of the history. He wasn't perfect, and he also wasn't expected, but he is the most known of all rulers for God's people. So how does this mere shepherd boy go from obscurity to becoming the most celebrated and courageous king of Israel? Because I think if you were to just read this story, if you were just to open 1 Samuel chapter 15 and read 17, if you just got into it, you could easily think that he just kind of rose to the occasion. Where just he had this like spiritual moment where it just like courage just entered him and you just win at it. That it seemed like he was just at the right place in the right time and he just happened to know what to do. But that's actually not the story of David. It's a wrong way of reading his life. He's actually not an anomaly. There was nothing about David that would scream courage to you, but just looking at this story. It would have been like the worst series of Instagram posts from him. It would have been all fields and sheep. That's it. But there's actually really easy to miss hints about what was going on in David's heart way before this moment he was called king. There's hints of this early courage that was developed in him when he was an obscure nobody, when no one was watching, when no one needed a king. So David was a writer. You can imagine being out with sheep. There's no one to talk to, so you write songs, I guess. And he wrote songs. In fact, so many of the Psalms that we read today were written during this time when he was out as a shepherd, not as a king. You can see it when he begins to fight Goliath. And I'll read it to you in chapter 17 because it's just way too good not to read. In chapter 17, verses 34 to 37, it says this, but David persisted, I've been taking care of my father's sheep and goats. So Goliath is basically like, who's going to kill me? And David's like, I'll kill you. And Goliath is like, you are a little shepherd boy with a sling and a stone. And Goliath is like 1,000,000 feet tall, right? Compared to me, super tall. Compared to you, normally tall. And he had all the armor. He had this huge spear, this sword that David couldn't even pick up, right? And he said, don't be ridiculous, Saul replied. There's no way you can fight this Philistine and possibly win. You're only a boy. And he's been a man of war since his youth. But David persisted in verse 34. It says, I've been taking care of my father's sheep and goats. And everyone's like, that doesn't help. It says, when a lion or a bear comes to steal a lamb for the flock, who cares about a lamb? How many times, if you were a shepherd and a bear comes at you, you'd be like, yo, take it. I've got lots more in the back. I ain't wrestling a bear. This is literally what David probably could have done. No one was looking. But he says, I go after it with a club. And I rescue the lamb from its mouth. Remind you of that guy with the dog and the crocodile, right? I rescue it. If the animal turns on me, I catch it by the jaw and club it to death. That is BA. I have done this to both lions and bears, and I'll do it to this pagan Philistine too. But listen to what he says. For he has defied the armies of the living God. And then listen, this is so important. See, the Lord who rescued me from the claws of the lion and the bear will rescue me from this Philistine. This guy's got a backstory. This is a good origin story. This is when he begins seeing David's courage, his heart had been developed years ago. when no one was asking anyone to save anybody. You see what's happening here? Who he was in the dark when no one was looking, when he wasn't known in obscurity, ultimately developed and determined who he would become when it counted. His courage to do the right thing at the right time, because it was the right thing to do, it never happened in a moment. It was something developed inside of him when no one was looking. His heart was right before God, doing the right thing, long before he was ever famous. Now, interestingly enough, courage is actually, it comes from a certain word. Do you know what it is? Heart. Cœur is a French way of saying heart. Courage comes from heart. The heart is the center of the inner life. It's where our will springs from. It's where our whole spiritual frame is in context when you read scripture, when God's speaking about the heart. It's not about appearance, but it's about the moral worth hidden in the depths of a person. See, God judges the disposition of the soul because it proves the heart right. That's why you hear things like, out of your mouth, your heart speaks. He became courageous by cultivating the right heart in obscurity. Listen, you may think, I'm unknown. Who am I? That's exactly where God does his best work. And let me explain it using our actual hearts. It's kind of developed the same way we develop our physical hearts when we're thinking of courage. See, if we don't train our hearts, if it's unprepared and untrained, when it's time to perform, our heart will let us know that we're unable to perform at peak performance, right? Have you ever had to run away from something or someone and you thought, I should have done a buttload of cardio before this happens? And you're just dying, you're dogging it. My wife, she wanted us to move our treadmill, which weighs 1,000,000 pounds, up 2 flights of stairs to another room just this past weekend. It was the worst thing she could have ever asked me to do. And it was so heavy, and both of us were like, we should use this a lot more. It's just the pain of it. And so if our hearts are unprepared, when it comes to when it's needed, it fails. And if it's that bad, it can go into cardiac arrest. And so sometimes that's why we wake up earlier. Before we go to bed, we work out. Sometimes that's why we decide to eat right. Why? It's not because we're being chased every day, but it's because we want to be able to perform at the right time, in the right way, when we're called to. See, for many of us, I think we're on the verge of spiritual failure and cardiac arrest. We think we'll be able to perform at the right time for God when it's necessary, only to be met with a heart untrained for what is right, for what's needed, to endure, to be durable, and to sustain performance, a heart unable to discern the quality of what is actually right from the temptation of what's just easiest. I mean, you see this even with conspiracy theories, where a lot of people are unable to discern the truth of something because their minds are untrained to know what is truth. So we fail. And many of us in this age group go into this spiritual cardiac arrest where it's just easier to give up. We fail to remain sexually vigilant because it's just too hard. We can't figure out why we don't have our dream job when you complain enough about the one you have now. We pull out our phones when we're out hanging out with great friends, yet we wonder why we feel so alone all the time. We struggle and we're not reaching out, feeling like you can't hold it together much longer. Your friends, well, they're not interested in Jesus, but if you're honest, you don't live like you are either. You wonder where Jesus is, but you haven't developed the right habits to engage him in everyday relationship. You wonder why we're always attract the wrong kind of people with recognizing that we often attract the people who resemble us the most. If we don't want to lose the courage to do the right thing at the right time, because it's the right thing to do, the reality is that we need to prepare our hearts now when it's not in demand. Where you are, with who you're with, and despite your circumstances. It's when you're not needed, when no one's looking, that's the best time for us to develop a spiritual heart that is prepared to be courageous in the right time, in the right place, because we know it's the right thing to do. This is a guy named B.J. Thompson. He says this: greatness is developed in the boring and unseen, never in the spotlight. So here's the thing. Here's how I'm going to end it. I can't give you like 3 things to do to increase courage levels in your life, right? Like I wish, almost like we had like this courage meter and just like bloop, 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 right? And I wish I could do that, but I can't. There's questions that I ask myself that I think we all need to ask ourselves going into this next year when we think about how do we not lose courage this year. I think these will help develop a heart to be courageous when it counts. I also think it'll help us be reflective. And so there's 5 questions. The first question is this: are you doing the hard, right things that will get you to where you want to be or need to be? So as you think about your life, and I think all of us can answer this in a lot of areas of our life, especially when it comes to our walk with Jesus, are we doing the hard, right things that will get us to where we know we need to be and want to be? I think of David shepherding, watching over his flock. Did you know that he was preparing for future leadership? Because he didn't. He had no idea he was going to be king. But as he cared for where he was at and doing the right thing, the hard right thing, he didn't know that God was using that to call him to greater levels of leadership. Second question: are you responding with fear or are you building faith in your life? So you have this picture in chapter 17 where you have this army, soldiers lined up, and they're all responding in fear. Then you have the shepherd boy who comes and he's been developing faith and he sees what no one else can see. And he destroys Goliath. And you know what's really crazy? It's not that what David did for himself. Do you know what was actually the greatest part of the story? Is after he conquered Goliath, the entire nation's faith rose to a level it had not been ever. And it's not that they had faith in David. Their faith in God was restored again. That I may be that person, that we may be those people that help restore other people's faith in God because of the way that we choose to live. Are we responding with fear or are we practicing building faith in our lives? What are you holding on to God for? What are you praying for? What are you believing for God to come through? Where are you hoping? Third question: have you spent enough time figuring out how Jesus would respond? How do you know what to do the right thing, what God wants you to do, unless we spend time with him? And you see this in David's life. He knew God intimately. Listen to some of the Psalms that he read and that he wrote, that the church collectively for thousands of years have used as ways to teach other people to pray. Do we spend enough time figuring out how Jesus would respond, who he is and his character? Fourth question: what is one hard, good thing that will help you endure when it counts? Now, that's going to be different for every single one of you. It's one of these weird things. I don't know if you find this, but if you choose to discipline yourself in one area, how it has a trickle effect in a lot of other areas? And maybe you have an area in your life where you're like, you know what, I need to practice doing something hard. What that does is it's kind of like it just trains you for hard things. But think about your spiritual life. What is maybe something God is calling you to do that seems a little hard and out of reach? And what if you attempted to just in that moment to do what was right because you knew it was a good thing to do? So here's the interesting thing. So David was called to be king. And in the exact same, within the same span of time, before he even became king, but he was called king, he was asked to do 2 very difficult things before he even conquered Goliath. The first thing he was asked to do is Saul went a little crazy by the end of his life and the end of his reign. And the only thing that would actually soothe him was music. Do you know who he called to play music for him? It was David. So you have David, who was called king because this guy went cray-cray, and he faithfully served him as his king. When Saul was chasing him in the caves to murder him, do you know what Saul did? Saul continued to honor him. The second thing that happened between David being called king and him becoming king was that his dad asked him to go bring lunch to his brothers on the front lines. And he did. He was faithful to his dad. He could have been like, Dad, I'm king. You bring me a sandwich, then you bring them a sandwich, come back home and make me another sandwich. He could have done that. But David didn't. He went. And it led to this entire scene with the army and Goliath. What is one hard, good thing that will help me endure when it counts? Something you're doing when no one is looking, because no one asked you to. You're doing it because you know it's right. And lastly, this is a hard one. What is something you're avoiding that you'd need to confront head on? I don't know what that is. I think all of us have something. But what are you avoiding that you need to stop? And you need to wrestle that down and confront it in your life. Maybe it's someone you got to start processing forgiveness for. Maybe it's a hurt that you're dealing with. Maybe you need to reach out for help and talk to somebody. See, you got Goliath in this army, and David doesn't avoid it. He goes head on. But here's the thing. David also messed up huge. And when he was called out on his sin, he dealt with it. He confronted it. Are you doing the hard, right things that will get you to where you want to be and need to be? Second question, are you responding with fear or building faith? Third question, have you spent enough time figuring out how Jesus would respond? Fourthly, what is one hard, good thing that will help you endure when it counts? And fifth, what is something you're avoiding that you need to confront head on? And then let me remind you, David was never developed in the spotlight. It was always when no one was looking. That is where God does his greatest work. You don't have to feel like you are somebody, because God already knows that he's made you for somebody. God wants to do something in you and through your life. Don't wait for the spotlight. That's not where things happen. The training happens when no one's looking. This is how we become courageous people who do the right thing, the right time, because we know it's the right thing to do. Let me pray for you. God, I thank you that we have stories like David. Actually, there's a multitude of stories I really could have chosen of people like me who maybe even just run away from stuff, or I think we all want to be like David, but even David kind of had a rough go. Really, at the end of the day, Jesus, I'm thankful that no matter who we are and where we're at, you love us. You designed us, you created us for you. And God, you have a plan and purpose for each one of us, and I just pray, God, this would encourage us to know that whether we feel like we're somebody or nobody, Lord, it's in the obscurity, it's in the unknown where you do develop us, and help us to be the kind of people who develop faith instead of fear, who do the right hard thing when no one's looking, so that when it counts, we're the first to respond out of reaction because you know it's the right thing. Jesus, it takes a lot of courage these days to be the kind of person that does the right thing at the right time because we know it's the right thing to do. God, help us to become those people. By your Spirit, would you create in us a new heart, one that where we can be an example in our life, in our speech, in our faith, and in our purity. Amen.
And see my King in majesty. Your grace compels my soul to love and draw and close. I lift my hands and sing, I surrender. Show me what I don't know, more of you. I'm desperate for your presence, longing to be with you. Lead me to a new place, more of you. Through the fire, I'll persevere. I won't submit to any fear. Where I go, you've been before. Oh, I Jesus, I surrender. Show me what I don't know, more of you. I'm desperate for your presence, longing to be with you. Lead me to a new place, more of you. Now until forever, Jesus, I surrender. Show me what I don't know, more of you. And I'm desperate for your presence, longing to be with you. Lead me to a new place, more of you. Yes, you are.
If you haven't already done so, make sure to fill out the Connect card, which you can find in the chat or by clicking this QR code. Remember that next week we are back in person and it's Connecting Point. Pre-registration will be required to join us in person so that we can stay under the 15% capacity mark. All the details will be posted on all our different platforms, so stay tuned. Tonight could be the last night we're hosting a Zoom watch party, so don't leave yet. Come hang out with us on Zoom for a couple minutes to dive into the message just a little bit deeper. Click the link in the chat and we'll see you there. That's it for me. We'll see you guys next week, whether you're joining us in person or online. See you then.